All right, welcome everybody to our Comparative Education and International Development Extended Community panel. So the CEID community includes a student society, a pathway/program for master's students, and a research group. So we're excited to have local organizations join us today that are working in the field to give us a taste of what they're doing and to talk a little bit about how students might be able to engage with some of the good work they're doing. There's a lot of excellent work being done by individuals in Scotland and organizations just here in Edinburgh as well. So it's a great opportunity to learn about it and start thinking about some of how some of what we're learning conceptually in class actually plays out in these organizations. So as you're going along, if you haven't already connected with us on Twitter, please do so. And you can also tweet about this event at Morehouse CEID at the bottom. So there are two panels today. You're in panel number 1, panel number 2, and we'll share the link to that panel at the end of this one. We'll start at 1 o'clock. We have so many excellent organizations, we had to break it into 2 panels. So for each panel, we'll start with a presentation by panelist. Then we'll have our event planning team ask a couple of panel questions before we open it up to the general audience for question and answer. So really excited to have our panelists join us for this first morning panel. We'll start with UN House Scotland, and Dr. Gari Donn, the Executive Director, has joined us to share what UN House Scotland has been doing. Then we'll hand it over to Scottish Love in Action, and Jamie McIntosh, the Chief Executive for Scottish Love in Action, who's just been in the position for under 2 months now, will join us. So welcome, Jamie. Glad you can make it. And welcome to the big community. So, and then we'll wrap up panel 1 with Scottdeck and inviting back Charlotte Dwyer, the director of Scottdeck, back to join us this year. So thank you, Charlotte. All right, so that is the structure. For our panelists, you can either ask me to move the slide along, or at the top, you can take control of the slide and move it along yourself. That's really up to you. So if I hear a next slide, I will move it along for you. So thanks so much for joining. If you are here joining us as an audience member, I encourage you to add questions to the chat box, write down your notes, what's inspired you, so we can get back to the Q&A as well. So here we go. So welcome, Gary. It's great to have you here and join us. And thanks for sharing about what UN House Scotland has been working on. So Gary, it's over to you. And Gary, if you're on, I think you're on, but I think you might be muted. So. Okay, Gary, are you there? I know I heard you when you arrived, but we can't hear you now. Okay. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and come back to Gary then for UN House Scotland. Jamie, you ready to jump in and share for Scottish Love in Action? We'll jump over here.
Hi. Great stuff. Okay. Hi, everybody. So as you've heard already, my name is Jamie, and I work for an organisation called Scottish Love in Action. So for roughly 10 minutes, I'll just give you a bit of an overview in terms of who we are and what we do. So Scottish Love in Action, in terms of so it's trying to get a bit of fun. First of all, I thought. Good. Okay, so in 1999, I don't know all of you, so but perhaps there's some of you that maybe before you were born, or perhaps just when you were still very young. But certainly in 1999, many things happened. The Euro started. In terms of Bill Clinton, former president of the United States, and he was impeached. Some of you might have been watching the programme that was on TV recently about Bill Clinton, the drama. So many things happened in 1999. But in terms of, as far as we're concerned, one of the most important things was that's when Scottish Love and Action was founded. So compared to some organisations, we are young, but certainly we feel in that time that we have been able to achieve quite a lot. Hang on one second, sorry, I'm having an issue with this. Oh. Are you able to go back? I'm trying to go back to the first slide, sorry, but I'm having issues.
Yeah, hold on one second. Let's.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm going to mute a participant.
That's okay. It was going so well.
All right. So I don't know. What slide are we on here?
Just the very first one is fine. So
Okay.
that's like slide 4.
Going back here. Sorry, why don't I take control and we'll figure it out from there. All right. So,
great stuff.
Jamie,
thank you.
Okay.
That's fantastic. So as you've heard, Sally, so as an organisation, we celebrated our 21st birthday last year, because that's when obviously after being started in 1999, and so we feel we've achieved a lot in that time, but certainly there's still a lot that we would like to achieve, and we have lots of ambitions to improve the lives of children and young people. We know that people around the world, some people will face more challenges than others, and we want to do our bit to correct that imbalance. So 21 years ago, Gilly Davidson, she travelled with a group of Edinburgh school pupils to Tuni in India, and the challenges that children and young people faced, that motivated and encouraged her to start our charity, which is Scottish Love and Action. So in terms of a little bit more about us, we believe everyone deserves to be equal. It doesn't matter, where somebody lives in the world and where somebody was born. So we want to give a voice to children and young people. We help children to understand their basic human rights. We show young people that they matter. We help children to stay in school and to learn. We help children to look after their mental health. And we help young people prepare to be independent adults. So ultimately, our vision is to help to transform the lives of vulnerable children and young people. We do have a slight focus on girls, but I say it's for children and young people. And we only work in India. That's our sole country. So in terms of just going back to the last slide, because we're sort of asked a bit about what do we do. So our primary purpose is to fundraise. So we are a fundraising organisation, and so we've got sort of 4 main aims. So I just put down a picture of 4 sheds. It could have been a picture of anything, but in terms of just to help you sort of see, these are the sort of the focuses for us. So the first one for us, which I just say is the yellow one, the one on the left, is fundraising. So for us as an organisation, we're looking to nurture and care for our supporters. So we have many people who are supporting us, and we want to nurture and care for them, ensuring they feel close to the communities they're transforming. In fundraising, one of the things is you have to get a connection between the people who want to help and the people who need help, and particularly in an international organisation, that's so much harder because the people who we're helping are not just around the corner, they're in a different country, speaking a different language, and people that somebody may never meet. So we need to make sure that people feel that connection to the people who they are serving. Also, we want to attract and engage new donors. For us as an organisation, we fundraise from 4 main sources, and that's individuals, trusts, corporates, and community fundraising. and they just want to try and be as efficient and as effective as we can be, so we can ultimately maximise the money that we are sending overseas. So the second aim for us, which we say is the green shed, is we want to focus on people. So we want to maximise the performance and potential of our staff. Now, we are a small organisation and we have 3 staff, and we're currently recruiting for our 4th. So really we want to make sure that we are, our staff are performing to the best of their ability. But there's nothing daft or silly that we are doing that's getting them in the way of maximising what they can do. And we also want to improve the recruitment and management of our volunteers. We just couldn't survive without our volunteers. So we want to make sure that we are keeping them, and that we're also recruiting new people as well. In terms of the blue shed, you could say that's our programmes. So we want to make sure that we have strong partners who are well governed, that they have effective leaders, and that they can sort of design, implement, monitor and report on high quality programmes. So we obviously place a lot of trust in our organisations who are overseas, and we know that they're the experts because they live locally, they know what the needs are, but ultimately we do place a lot of trust in them. So we want to make sure that they are accountable to us and to the people who have effectively given the money that's helping their work. We also want to make sure that we amplify the voice of our Indian partners. So some of the challenges or obstacles that our partners face in India would be unheard of or unfathomable to us here in Scotland. And so we want to make sure that we are educating people in Scotland as to why we work in India. Sometimes people might say that India is less deserving or less needed than other countries. And so we want to help people to understand that there's a great need for work to happen in India. And then lastly is the red shed, if you want to say. That's our 4th aim, and that's around governance and strategy. So we want to make sure that we are well run, that we have the right infrastructure, that we have a sound business model. So to give you a bit of an example, and this is all publicly available information, 4 out of the last 5 years, we have spent more money than we've brought in. So that's obviously unsustainable. And although I've only been in post for less than 2 months, that's obviously a key focus of my work, to make sure that we are sustainable going forwards. And we also want to make sure that we are delivering against the focuses of the people who we are serving, to make sure that we are working in the way that is going to help them. And just want to make sure that we are making decisions that are rooted in data and insight, that we're not making decisions based on because the way we've always done things, or it's our gut instincts, but rather it's based on what is genuinely needed. So ultimately that is who we are as an organisation. It's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but in terms of focusing on education, we partner with 3 organisations in India. One of the main organisations we partner with is called Voice for Girls. You're more than welcome, you can Google them and find out more about them. It's looking to see that girls, particularly around about whenever they hit puberty, there's a lot of change happening in their lives. Here in Scotland, we benefit from social education, or PSE, you might have it in schools, but in India, sadly that support often isn't available. So girls are going through changes in terms of their body, in terms of their minds, in terms of their what's happening around about them, and sadly they often lack the basic support which they need. And so we want to help children, and we want to empower them to know that they have a future, not a future that's decided by their families, for instance, marrying them off, which is at a young age, which can sadly girls can get pregnant, and obviously that can lead to health complications if it happens at a young age. But you want to let them know that there is a future for them and that they have potential. So we empower them to stay in school and to challenge what may have been happening for decades or hundreds of years in their local communities. So as I say, we empower children and young people and we transform their lives. So that's the whistle-stop tour of who Scottish Love in Action is. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks, Jamie, for joining, and thanks for the rundown of Scottish Love in Action. I'd encourage students, as we're going through organizations, if there are organizations that you're really interested in having a follow-up conversation or exploring more, do jot them down, take your notes, so we have a chance to ask these questions at the end and reconnect. Gary, I can see you.
Hooray, hooray.
Hooray.
Just at the moment when you said, and now, Gary, the system went off. The internet where I live is not terribly reliable. So I've got my iPhone as well at the ready, should I get cut off again. I do apologise, but that was really interesting to hear Jamie on Scottish Love in Action. Thank you, Jamie. And thank you, Will, for inviting UN House to make this brief contribution to your day for the organisations that are putting into practice what students are learning at Murray House. Just to say, I used to be an academic at Murray House and was very involved with the Masters in Education, and particularly the International Development. Methodological Challenge of the International was one of the courses that I was particularly interested in. So it's nice to be back and speaking to you. Shall I just launch in, Will?
Yep, go for it. It's great to have you, Gary.
Okay. Slide 2, please.
Yep.
What I'm going to speak about in the next few minutes is UN House Scotland and the way in which we address the SDGs. I'll focus on the local, the national, the international, and I'll mention some of the projects and programs that we are running. And I'll also mention the importance, in my view, of SDG 617, partnerships for the implementation of the goals. Next slide. This is not going to be unfamiliar. So it's, next slide. It's the culmination, as you will know in your course, of the replacement for the Millennium Development Goals, which of course came in 2000. By 2015, there were the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals, and as you can read here, they are the blueprint, the path that we, for people and the planet, that we are following. And whereas the UN does this at political diplomatic level, we at UN House Scotland, under the umbrella of the United Nations Association, try to implement and draw attention to the needs in Scotland of the Sustainable Development Goals on the ground. Next slide. I think in panel 2, you'll come across the Sdg Network, and you'll know that from the conversation then, that there are over 120 organisations in Scotland in this network. UN House is one. Next slide. I'm pretty hopeless, aren't I? I can't get online, and then when I do, I've got this stupid cough that's just come on. Our UN House Scotland works with these 3 missions to communicate, to collaborate, and to make a contribution. And we do that by recognising that we are part of an association, and there are 7 branches of the United Nations Association in Scotland. When the UN was formed in 1945, in 1946, the political diplomatic entity was paralleled by a grassroots civil society association. And I think there are 140 or so countries in the world that have associations. These are civil society grassroots organisations trying to implement on the ground the goals and to take from the ground back to the UN the way in which these goals are perceived or have problems on the ground. We're doing this implementation and activity through a large number of projects, but they are all run by, created by, and run by interns. We are a totally voluntary organisation, and our mantra is that if an intern arrives and has a project that they would like to see activated in Scotland, then we will work with them and with other interns to try and make it happen. Next slide, please. Oh, have I frozen?
Sorry, now I can see.
Next slide. Oh, there we are. Good.
Yeah.
So some of our partners, I've got these logos here, just some of the partners. The one to the bottom right, ICANN. ICANN is a really important example of the way in which civil society can impact on the UN. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was ratified and came into force, entry into force on the 22nd of January last year. So tomorrow it's the anniversary, and the role of civil society in getting that through has been phenomenal. Excuse me. Next slide, please. With our partners, we are holding seminars and conferences, and they're often on international issues. And most recently, Yemen has been, as we all know, slightly out of the news, and it's really upsetting that it's out of the news. Syria, what's happening in Syria? What's happening in Yemen? It's terribly important that these international issues have a high profile in countries where the media might not be dealing with them as much as one would wish. So we hold conferences and seminars to keep the momentum going. Next slide. And our local partnerships are paralleled with international, and as Will knows, having been with UNESCO, one of our key partners internationally is UNESCO. We also work very closely with UN Women and with UNITAR, the United Nations Training and Research Institute. Through those local and international partnerships, our interns organize conferences, seminars, and then write reports. And these reports go to all parliamentarians in Scotland and also to our wide network through our mailing lists. And as I say, everybody is doing this on a voluntary basis. So people who get involved with UN House really want to do something for the betterment of humanity. Next slide, thank you. We've just heard about Scottish Love in Action working in India. And of course, it's incredibly important with UNESCO, these are UNESCO statistics, to work with those countries that have the most need. We also are aware that India is one of the countries, to go back to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, India is one of the countries that has nuclear weapons. So it's quite important for us to balance the needs of a country's people with the communication at a higher level to those parliamentarians who may well be attending at the UN, to draw attention to the inequity of the military expenditure on one side and the poverty on another, not just in India, but in many countries. And it's because we can attend the UN that many of our interns are in a position when they're either in Vienna or Paris, Nairobi or New York, to speak with those parliamentarians, with statespersons when they are there, and to draw attention to the work that's ongoing, not just in Scotland, but obviously particularly at any one moment what's going on in Scotland, but also generally that NGOs and civil society do not want, for example, on this particular SDG 16 issue, they do not want the expenditure on nuclear weapons, all weapons, when there is tremendous poverty on the other hand. And I do think that one of the things that we are so pleased about at UN House Scotland is not just the enthusiasm of our interns, but also the commitment they make when they go to New York or wherever to actually speak with the states parties representatives. Next slide. At a local level here in Scotland, we create from our seminars and from our conferences parliamentary one-pagers, and these are some of the subjects that go to, on a regular basis, that go to members of the Scottish Parliament. You'll see that one of the parliamentary one-pagers has been on and continues to be on, because we update them, human trafficking. UN House Scotland is the secretariat for the cross-party group on human trafficking. So we have a very important relationship with parliamentarians in that particular area of human trafficking. I mean, there's been so much, hasn't there, about COP26, and of course, youth climate activism and climate education, another parliamentary one-pager, was well received by the members of the Scottish Parliament. Next slide. These are what our parliamentary one-pagers look like. We call them POPs. And it's a way to ensure that when we hold a seminar or a conference, you know, in the last 2 years, they've all been on Zoom, but whenever we hold a seminar or conference, we make sure that we don't just write a report, which does go to parliamentarians and our mailing list, but also we make it a succinct, we draw out the key issues and make it a succinct one-pager that members of Parliament and others can read quite easily and can use that data when they come to debates in the Parliament. Final slide, I think. So that's a brief overview, and this is us, and we'd be very happy to hear from you if you are wishing to hear more about UN House Scotland and to perhaps get involved in one way or another. Thank you, Will.
Excellent. Thank you, Gary, for joining, even despite some technical difficulties, and it wouldn't be a virtual webinar without technical difficulties. So, all right, for our final presenter for panel one, I'd like to welcome, and I think, let's see, I got this right. Sorry, I'll do it this way. There we go. Okay, I'd like to welcome Charlotte Dwyer, the director of Scottdeck. So welcome, Charlotte, it's over to you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all. I was really interested to listen to Gary's presentation. I was thinking what an amazing opportunity it is to become an intern with UN House. So thank you for that. So I'm Charlotte. I work at Scotdec, which is a development education centre or a global learning centre, depending on what language we use. We're based here in Edinburgh, but we're part of a small network of 5 centres that are situated across Scotland. So we tend to work in a kind of grassroots way. So we've got a centre in Dundee, there's a centre in Glasgow, there's a centre up in Highland. And so we all work together really in the field of education. So this is our vision. We established ourselves over 30 years ago now, but we're a very small organisation. We only have 5 members of staff. And our vision really is that young people in Scotland challenge global inequality. And this is really grounded on our belief and commitment to social justice, which really is what underpins everything that we do. And the work that we do, we try to deliver in an inclusive and a participatory way, and that's the kind of approach that we take for education. But overall, we want to empower young people to bring about positive change within both their local and their global communities. And we do this through working with teachers and other educators to build their capacity and confidence in this approach, which we call global citizenship. So for us, global citizenship is a kind of a way of living that recognises our world as a complex web of connections and interdependencies. And it's about interrogating and understanding the choices we have and the actions that we make and how they might have unseen consequences, both locally, nationally, and internationally. So a lot of it is about relationships. It's about understanding and interrogating those relationships, both locally and globally. But it's also about interrogating those relationships in terms of the past and the present and the future. So it might be through particular issues such as climate change or refugees or gender, but it's also about acknowledging past harmful agendas, historical injustices, and thinking about how that has created the current power dynamics and structures that we live in. So we approach global citizenship education through a critical lens, and we try to make sure our work is informed by decolonial theory. And we really want to support educational professionals and learners to question these assumptions that lie underneath the status quo, the things that we might accept and take for granted, and really develop the skills and agency themselves to, I suppose, in some ways disrupt traditional power structures, but just become really more aware of the realities of the world that they live in, and to build solidarity and build their own agency in being more aware of what the world is like, and to learn more about issues such as climate change, fair trade, and all those issues are things that we see coming under the global citizenship banner. So like Gari, our work is connected to the Sustainable Development Goals, and that's quite often a context for learning that we share with teachers and encourage them to use when they're working in the classrooms with their learners. But I particularly wanted to highlight target 4.7, which comes from Sdg 4, quality education, because this really calls for this type of educational approach that I'm talking about. I mean, we can see it mentions global citizenship education, but it's also about sustainable development, it's about human rights, it's about gender equality. So what we really do as an organisation and network is advocate for 4.7 to be central to education. We're lucky in Scotland, we do have a strong policy context for this, but we still believe we need to advocate for this to go further, to remain prominent, and also that it's not just in Scotland that this type of education is seen as important. So how do we do this? One of the main channels that we do is we offer professional learning for teachers and youth workers and increasingly other educators to explore how they can embed education for global citizenship into their own practice. So in that way, we believe that we can reach out to more learners by building capacity in the system. So we offer courses on things like Sustainable Development Goals, children's rights, political literacy, climate emergency, and we really have a strong focus on developing core skills like critical literacy, developing empathy, cooperation, and managing complex issues, as well as encouraging young people to explore their values and think about what their values are, where they come from, and interrogate some of those kinds of assumptions. So we have short courses, kind of a 2-hour dip your toe in, and then we have a longer year-long course where teachers gain professional recognition at the end of it. So there's kind of lots of different courses that we offer for a variety of people. We also develop resources to support what's going on in classrooms. So we've got a popular pack on the SDGs, we've got film resources, we've got a whole series of toolkits for secondary teachers, and all those resources are available to download for free on our website. As a small organisation, partnerships are one of the things that are increasingly really important for us in order to kind of reach out and work, have as much impact as possible through our work. So I've mentioned that there's 5 development education centres across Scotland. We're part of a wider ideas network, which has members such as Oxfam and Christian Aid, all organisations that have a commitment to delivering global citizenship education. So we work, the network's quite strong in Scotland, and we work to kind of advocate for this approach to be education to be embedded in Scottish education. We have also had partnerships with the British Council, so we supported the delivering of their Connecting Classrooms programme. And pre-Brexit, we used to have quite a lot of European funding and work in some quite exciting projects across Europe. So we're still looking to how we can plug that gap. But we have had some quite exciting and innovative new partnerships despite Brexit, and we've actually been working with NHS Scotland, who have their own global citizenship programme. So we've been working with them to develop training and resources, which has been really exciting. And we are also really exploring and developing our own expertise in anti-racist education. And we have been working with partners to bring some more of this training to teachers and to develop resources to support this development as well. We've also got a new anti-racist education toolkit on our website, which isn't really just for teachers, it's for anyone who's interested in developing their own anti-racist education practice. So I've touched on partnerships. A lot of these partnerships have evolved into projects or have developed through projects. We've got a number of small ones on at the moment. We've got quite an interesting maths project looking at how we can create more participative, democratic maths classrooms, and how maths can really help to understand and explore some of the global issues that come up through the Sustainable Development Goals. We're working with the NHS to develop their understanding. And I suppose for us, these projects and partnerships are looking at how we can bring global citizenship education, not just within the formal sector and the youth sector, to see what possibilities it's got in other sectors and other places as well, in order to really educate more widely about the Sustainable Development Goals and about some of these issues, which I think are important to all of us who are here today. So just to finish off, we're a small organisation. We don't have a formal internal volunteer system, but we quite regularly have volunteers. So if you're interested, then please do reach out and get in touch, and we're interested to hear your ideas. And if you have any teacher or youth worker friends, then please do share our website and resources and opportunities with them, because we're really keen to connect with as many teachers as we can across Scotland. So yeah, thank you for listening to me today, and I look forward to chatting some more over the next hour or so.
Excellent. Thanks, Charlotte. So I really appreciate all 3 of our panelists today. What's great about this is you can see kind of the shared value across these different panels. And a lot of our students talk about, well, what can we do in this field? And we see a shared value, but we see 3 very different approaches to helping this type of global citizenship, human rights, education for sustainability, education and development connections across. So I really appreciate the diversity in all 3 of our panelists. I'm now going to invite our event planning team up to ask a couple of questions just to get us started of the entire panel. So I want to start by asking Evelyn to come up and ask the first question for our panelists, and she'll ask them to and kind of help moderate across all 3 panelists before we move to the second question. So Evelyn, thanks for joining, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Will. Good morning, everyone. I'm Evelyn. I'm a part of CEID event planning team. So there are 2 pre-collected panel questions in this session, and I'm responsible for the very first one. So the question is, how has the pandemic affected your work, and what are the main lessons from the pandemic. And it is also shown in the chat box as well. And each panelist have roughly 3 to 4 minutes. Gary, it's nice to see you again. Would you mind start first?
Thank you, Evelyn. I suppose when the pandemic started, now 2 years ago, we thought it was going to be quite different to the way it's developed. I suppose many of us thought that it would probably take a little while and then it would be over. And of course, that's not been the case. So when we started thinking about how to continue our work during the pandemic, we learnt how to use Skype. It's strange, isn't it? We don't use Skype anymore. I don't think many people use Skype anymore, but for a while it was, thank goodness we've got Skype. So we did everything on Skype. And of course, the thing with Skype was you had to know the name of the person that you wanted to speak to. And sometimes there were 40 names that were very similar. And so you had to work out which country you were. Anyway, you can understand there were problems. When we moved to Zoom, things really took off. So your question for me is, the pandemic has opened up opportunities for communication. And many of our interns who had been students, or in fact were still students, had to return or did return to their home countries. So we're now in this wonderful position. For example, yesterday, 5:30 UK time, we had a house meeting and we've got 17 projects ongoing at the moment. And the team leaders for each of those projects, plus a couple of others, were online. And so we had people online from China all the way across the world in different countries to Guatemala. And it was quite extraordinary that you could speak to all these people. And I just thought, there have been changes in the way we do things. We don't have to all meet in person, although it's very nice to do that. But we've used Zoom to the fullest possible entity to be able to continue our communication. We've held seminars, we've held conferences, we've written reports, and we've done it all on Zoom. I know that we're using Teams at the moment, and that, you know, similarly, you can make communication so much easier now that we have these platforms. So for us, it's, I mean, one would never say it's been beneficial, but what we have tried to do is use the opportunities that have been presented, and it's been actually quite good. Thank you, Evelyn.
Thank you, Gary, for sharing your ideas. Jamie, would you go next and share some ideas in Scottish Love in Action?
Hi, thank you. So similar to what Gary was saying, in terms of the pandemic, it's obviously had an impact on our work. We haven't been able to escape it. So I suppose I'll look at it in two main ways. So in terms of in Scotland, how it has impacted our work here, as I mentioned earlier on, we call ourselves a fundraising organisation, and then one of the main ways that we raise funds is what we would call community fundraising. So events or community groups going out and organising things. So anything from a coffee morning to, you know, lots of events like that. One of the main ways that we have for community fundraising is we hold an annual fireworks display, which some of you may be aware of. It's one of the biggest fireworks displays in Edinburgh, and it's something that we do doing for 10 years to raise funds for us. Sadly, for the last 2 years, we haven't been able to hold that fireworks display, and so that has been horrendous in terms of our income, because it's a major contributor to how we fundraise. So it's really, we have had to adapt in terms of how we have been generating income. So we've been looking at alternative methods, particularly using digital, but also things that people are comfortable doing, perhaps at home or in smaller groups, without having to go to in-person events. So it has impacted us here in Scotland. In terms of overseas, we solely work in India. Our partners, one of the projects that we support, they would run camps, and so they would be physical camps in person, where children would come together, hundreds of children. Sadly, again, that was couldn't happen in terms of that interaction, people coming together in a big group, and so instead that has moved online. Obviously, there are implications for that in terms of making sure that people have devices and technology that they can access the camps. For many of our pupils, they didn't either have devices, or if they had a device, they were sharing it with other people in their family. So that did cause complications. However, it's not been entirely negative, because I don't want to sound all doom and gloom. One of the things we found is that whenever girls would go to a camp, so it could be away, say, for 4 days, and then whenever they come back home, although they are enthused and excited about what they've learned, and they want to then share it with other people in terms of gender equality, stopping child marriage, but sometimes they can seem less keen to share that, because by the time they get back home, just physically the commute, if you like, the distance. Whereas now, if children are learning about things in their home, they simply have to open the door and they can share it with their friends and family. So in the same way as here in Scotland, people talk about, you no longer have that commute between work and home, it's sort of all blended as one. For us, that's actually been quite a positive thing, because the girls have then felt that they can then share things with friends and family, with their community, because they're learning and then they're straight into the community. So there have been complications or impact, but as with everyone, we're just having to adapt it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Charlotte, I'm really sorry that to hear that you have missed the firework due to the pandemic, but we would like to listen more your pandemic experience in Scottdeck.
Yeah, thank you. I live quite close to where the fireworks display used to be, so I'm a big fan of fireworks. So the pandemic, in terms of us, we had to kind of change our working practices pretty quickly and pretty dramatically, because we used to do all our professional learning face-to-face. We used to travel to various different local authorities. We used to run workshops for teachers in rooms, in real spaces, and we had to scramble to figure out how to move it all online and learn all the new technology very quickly. One of the challenges for us is that local authorities seem to use different technology. So sometimes we're on Teams, sometimes we're on Zoom, sometimes we're on Google Meet, and you had to learn all the platforms quite quickly. And the other challenge for us was that our professional learning is developed in a way which it's really participative, it's active learning methodologies, and it was quite challenging to figure out how we could try and recreate that experience online. And I have to say that I think a lot of the platforms have developed really quickly over the last couple of years. So there's a lot more tools now and methods of availability to do that. So we changed everything to online, and in some respects it has made it more accessible for teachers. So we probably get more teachers attending our sessions than we did previously, which is really good. But at the same time, I do miss that face-to-face experience, because it is a different learning experience from one that you get online. So I suppose in the future, we're looking to have more of a hybrid model, where we'll do some professional delivery online, and we'll do some face-to-face, and have developed more kind of hybrid and blended learning models. So it's been probably challenging, but positive for us in many ways.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you again for all the three panelists for sharing your insightful views. I will now pass it to you, Rona.
Hello? You can hear me, right? Okay, hi everyone. My name is Rona. I am also part of the CEID event planning team. Thank you all for sharing your experience during the pandemic. Everyone is now facing the same situation, and we are all kind of learning to live with it and making the best out of it. Now, let's move to our second question. As students, many of us are very curious about your career. So the second panel question is, how did you get to your current position? And please describe your professional journey. I think this question will help us a lot. Now, can we have Charlotte to go first? We don't want to always wait you to be the last.
Okay, sure, thank you. So I started my professional career as a teacher. I was a secondary English teacher, and I worked in schools in London, in Scotland, and I also worked in an international school in Sri Lanka. And then from there, I went to, so I had my academic background was in English literature, so nothing to do with international development, but I do have a teaching qualification. And then from there, based on the kind of skills and experience I had as a teacher, I went with VSO, Voluntary Services Overseas, and I spent 2 years working in Eritrea, and there I was working for the working with the Ministry of Education there on upskilling teachers in their English, because a lot of the curriculum, the secondary curriculum, was delivered through the medium of English, but the skills of the the level of the English language of the teachers wasn't particularly high, so I spent some time supporting the development of the English language learning and teaching, and also kind of curriculum development. And from there, I came back to Scotland for personal reasons. And then when I was in Scotland, I joined, I joined Scottdeck at that point. And so I've been with Scottdeck for quite a long time. I found it a really great organization to work with. I think one of the things I've noticed about small organizations is that if you are kind of self-motivated, there's lots of opportunities. So I'd say I do all kinds of different things. I'm now the director of the organization, but in a typical week, I might, have advocacy meetings. I might deliver a training course. I might deal with HR issues. Like I had 50% of my team off sick this week, so I was having to pick up urgent admin tasks that hadn't been done. So I suppose that kind of keeps you on your toes and keeps the job interesting. But I suppose key skills would be, I think you need to have a kind of a background in education for the work that we do. And I think, you have to be really adaptable and prepared to kind of pick up any jobs, even think, the rubbish jobs as well as the exciting jobs when you work in a little organization.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. That's an interesting story. Now let's welcome Jamie. Jamie, can you please share your career experience, please?
Yes, hi. So I sort of started off, I studied business studies and accounting at Edinburgh University. So for me, that was quite helpful to get a good grounding in different areas, whether it's law, strategy, HR, organisational studies. So it was a good sort of broad degree. And then ever since then, I've worked for charities, always humanitarian, whether it's working here in Scotland or overseas. But I've tended to focus on organisations working overseas. There are numerous small charities based in Scotland who work overseas. So certainly there are many opportunities for that. Obviously, you can gain experience through volunteering, through internships, or working with them. And so, for most of it, I suppose it's been learning on the job with the different charities. Working for small organisations, you really are thrown in the deep end, and so it's similar to what Charlotte's been saying. You'd be wearing many hats. It's simply a case of getting stuff done, but it's working for small charities, I think, is good because you can be agile and you can be responsive to what the needs are. So particularly obviously through the pandemic, if you work for a bigger organisation, they can be very bureaucratic. There's a lot of red tape, and so sometimes certainly I felt frustrated because you want to get something done and you know how it should happen, but in order for that to happen, it can take forever. But working for a small organisation, it's fantastic to have that freedom and that ability. So say my background is business studies and accounts, and then really I suppose I focus on fundraising and marketing. I have a diploma in fundraising, and so for small organisations, particularly like us, who are giving grants to our overseas partners. Then fundraising would be for us as a key skill. Effectively, we need to bring in the money, and then particularly through the pandemic, income streams that we have relied on in the past have dried up, and so it's being creative and making sure that we are being receptive to our audiences and what are they wanting. So, for instance, in March we are launching a new regular giving programme, which is all about Pip, a red squirrel from Scotland, and she's going to be travelling around India, and so she goes on adventures and she sees the different projects that we are supporting in India. So that's something which we've never done before, but say because of the pandemic, we're having to think creatively. That's me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. I think it is very important that when Jamie said that if we want to step into that industry, that field, it is better to start with internship volunteering. So thank you. And now let's invite Gary from UN House Scotland to tell us how you get to your current position and your professional journey.
Thank you.
Hi, Gary.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good, I'm still on, that's good. Well, my journey, I suppose, started, by the way, I do think everything about careers is not necessarily logical or rational, and often it's happenstance and it's serendipity. So after my first degree in politics, philosophy and economics, I did a teaching qualification to allow me to teach in further education or higher education. And I got a few posts in further education. So I was teaching bricklayers and gas fitters and electricians what at that time was called general studies, which meant they were not just learning their skill and trade, but they were also having social, political, other types of discussions in these general studies classes. And on one occasion, I was due to have a 2-hour class with a group of electrician 3, which is 3rd year. Often they were in the college for 5 years. So electricians 3, it was a difficult course, difficult class. And I had been reading something about nuclear energy. And I thought, oh, that's electricity. Ah, right. So I, by chance, had read something, went into that 2-hour class and spoke about nuclear energy. And we had a whole term on that because it became very interesting for them, but even more interesting for me because I thought, wow, this is fascinating. So I moved to Strathclyde University to do a PhD on nuclear energy. And during that time, I focused on the policy for nuclear energy. It was a history, politics approach to nuclear energy. When I finished, I was lucky enough to get a job at Oxford, where I was doing some research on nuclear energy and the 5 nuclear weapons possessing countries. And after a couple of years of that, there was a post advertised at Edinburgh University in education policy. And I thought, goodness, if I can do nuclear energy policy, I can jolly well do education policy. So I applied, and that's when I came in 1989 to Edinburgh University and took over the convenership of the MSc in education. So it was quite a serendipitous journey. And having been at Edinburgh University for a number of years, as you can imagine, starting in 1989, I retired in 2015. But for 5 years prior to that, I had established the UN House in Scotland. And I thought when I retired, I would continue with having links to the university, which of course I do as an honorary fellow, but also build up UN House Scotland. So it's been a rather interesting journey, but as I say, happenstance and serendipity are the 2 watchwords, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. I really like what you said about not every career start logically and rationally. And I guess we always need to welcome the unexpected things in our career. So thank you all for sharing. I am handing over now to Will.
Excellent.
Hello.
Thanks, Rona. Yep. Thanks, Rona, and thanks to the panelists for sharing a little bit about your background experiences and how they've shifted in the organization around the pandemic. So at this point, I'd like to invite anyone into asking questions. They can be about specific organizations, they can be to our whole panel, they can be about the work of the organization, or more on this career and how do I prepare track. So you're welcome to ask questions in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and introduce yourself. It's a great way to make this initial connection with these organizations. So I'll give everybody a second. That includes our event planning team. If you have additional questions, please feel free to jump in. Yeah, Chun-Hu, Huang, welcome.
Hi. Thank you for your sharing. So I am wondering, kind of interesting that both organizations, UN House Scotland and the Scottdeck, the Global Learning, all have like collective sections about global citizenship education. For UN House Scotland, they have the UN, the model United Nations. So I'm just wondering if you two have thought about some collaborative projects working together.
May I reply and say, what a good question. Because when I was speaking, when I did my presentation, I thought, crikey, this is a class of education persons. And I should have mentioned the Model UN. And so thank you for mentioning it. And yes, I do think, Charlotte, we have overlaps there. And I know in the past we've tried to connect, but we will do that, I'm sure, because, you know, one of the things that we've done in the last year on Teams actually was to run a Model UN for schools, primary schools. And often Model UNs are secondary, as you know, are secondary schools, and you often in higher education as well. But we organised a Model UN for 6 primary schools in June last year, towards the end of the academic year. We had 70 young 11 and 12 year olds. They were primary 7 children, and we simplified the approach of the Model UN, and we had a resolution that they were developing amendments on, which was on climate and social justice. And it was phenomenal. It was really good, and we got a huge amount from it, our team at UN House, but they too, from their teachers, were very aware of how wonderful it was for the children to have that experience. They had exposure also to the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees, who came in and spoke online, as did the Scottish Young Person Commissioner. And the fact that these young people and their teachers were exposed to these high-level persons was actually very important. So, Charlotte, I'm going to take up the possibilities of further conversation with you, and thank you very much for that question.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Yeah, do please let's see if we can collaborate some more. I was remembering actually we did have. It was a few years ago now, certainly before the pandemic, but we ran a series of seminars on, it must have been quite soon after the Sustainable Development Goals have been launched, maybe in 2017-18, we did run a series of seminars for teachers around, so they could dig a bit deeper into each of the SDGs. And I'm pretty sure we had interns from UN House who supported some of those events and helped us source speakers and things. So it would definitely be good to reconnect again.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the positive remarks. I was a model UNer when I was in my undergraduate study. And then I moved on to teach at secondary school. And by the time I also coached school model UN teams. And I also participate in some sort of like global citizenship learning projects. So I feel like two can actually work together. And I'm looking forward to be more involved if there are possibilities.
Could I just add, if I might, one of your temporaries a couple of years ago, Yumio Ma, did her master's dissertation with us at UN House on model UNs. It was at a time when we could meet each other, and she attended various MUNs, one at the City of Edinburgh, City Chambers in Edinburgh, where we had 100 young people, primary, working on this model UN. And she then went on to continue with her PhD. So she's at Murray House now, where she was doing her master's, and she's continued. She's recently returned from Beijing. Yumio Ma might well be a person you might like to contact just to see how she found the model UN journey. She's about to finish, I think this is her third year now on her PhD, but it gives you an idea that, yes, there are opportunities that draw in the academic with the practical. So I'll be very happy to meet you on Zoom sometime in the future.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. I will surely contact Yumi Ma for more information, and looking forward to see you in the future, maybe. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, other questions from our panelists? So one of the important things, and one of the reasons we have a panel like this, is the sense of networking and making connections and really having an insider view of what does it mean to work in this field. So please do take advantage of this opportunity. It's a unique opportunity that you have here. Rona, I see you've got your hand up. Go ahead and jump in.
Yes, hi. I have a question for Charlotte about her career, because she talked about being an English teacher and curriculum developer earlier, and then now moved to the current position working for Scotdec. So how do you make those connections from your previous work, and why did you choose to work as in the current position? Because I think these two are kind of different.
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose for me, so my early career was as a teacher, but I was having I suppose because I worked overseas and in the UK, I was kind of interested in education overseas as well. But I suppose it was my voluntary service overseas experience which was really key to me, and I would urge people to have a look at the organisation. I think it's an excellent volunteering opportunity, but they take people who are kind of professionals, who have skills, who can really add value to the placements that they go in overseas. But for me, I suppose it had quite a big impact on me, because I was embedded. Eritrea is one of the poorest countries on earth. It has quite a difficult history. It's in East Africa. I was embedded in quite a small rural community for 2 years, and I suppose it had a profound impact on me, living with such extreme poverty. And it wasn't just inequality, everyone was poor. And I suppose it was really hard when I came back to the UK to reconcile the lives that majority of the people in Eritrea had compared with the lives the majority of the people in UK had. And I suppose for me, it was thinking about what I could do in order to change that. And I suppose for me, education is a really powerful way of trying to address some of these global issues like inequality. And I really do believe that educating people about that is really, really important, particularly young people in Scotland, so that they are more aware of these issues and what they can do about them. So I suppose that kind of experience was kind of pivotal to me. And it is very much about education, but it's about a particular approach to education that I take now, I suppose.
So can I ask, which job do you prefer now? Which experience do you think is more interesting for you? Is it the experience as a teacher, as a curriculum developer, or as in your current position?
I think it's my current position. Yes. I like teaching. Teaching has its own challenges, and sometimes I miss it. But I think for me, I think I suppose I never felt that I was the greatest teacher on the planet, so I think I feel more comfortable working with adults than young people. So that's a very honest disclosure there. And my husband's a teacher, and I think teaching is a really difficult job. It's really tough being a secondary teacher, I think, out there.
Yeah, okay. So thank you. I asked this question because I have been thinking about my career too, because I used to work in the teaching area, and now I'm kind of thinking of being more open to new opportunities and fields. So that's why I'm asking. Thank you.
No problem.
Perfect. Thanks, Rona and Charlotte. Other questions? We still have a little bit of time. I'm going to jump in with a question as people are thinking about it. So, Jamie, I think your experience at SLA really reflects the importance of communication and the ability to communicate why we should care about some of these experiences, especially when they happen far away from Scotland and far away from people's homes. Wondering if you can talk about, I think your third shed there was trying to communicate why we should care about India, especially since, Scotland, for those of you who aren't aware, so Scotland government has identified 4 partner countries, and that's why you see a lot of the local organizations dealing with those 4 partner countries. Just to be aware, those are Malawi, Pakistan, Rwanda, and Zambia, where the Scottish government has provided some funding to support those countries. India is not on that list. So wondering, when people do ask you, so why should we care about India? Why are we investing in India? What do you say?
No, what you've said is very fair. So it hasn't been deliberate, but while I've worked in different international development organisations who worked in a variety of countries, the common thread has always been India. So all organisations they've worked in different countries, let's say Nigeria, Bangladesh, but of the 4 international development organisations I've worked for, they've always worked in India. So there has always been a common thread that India is somewhere where help is needed. Certainly, I've had the opportunity to see the work in India firsthand. Whenever I worked for a previous charity called the Leprosy Mission, and that was somewhere where we worked. While there is great prosperity, there are a number of millionaires and billionaires in India. Sadly, the money isn't evenly spread around. And you might say it's the same here in the UK or around the world. Whenever you had, Richard Branson or Jeff Bezos, going on to want to travel to outer space. And yet there's extreme poverty here in our country. So you are right. Having worked with the Scottish Government before, their International Development Fund, they funded a project, a previous charity within Bangladesh. And so while there are different governments will have priorities in terms of who they fund and who they prioritise, we are quite fortunate as an organisation because we fundraise from different sources that even while India isn't a country that's prioritised by the government, we are able to attract funding from different sources. So to give a random example, we have a corporate partnership with Tuk Tuk. So that's an Indian restaurant chain, and they are a very good fit for our charity. So obviously their staff, their customer base are supportive of what's happening in India, and so while it's obviously something that say governments aren't supporting, we are fortunate we have that variety that we can then look at other sources where people are open to that idea. But then also just to finish, as you said, part of our work is to educate people, because if people don't understand, it is easier for a charity, for instance, if they're running, say, a food bank, because people can sort of see that the poverty that's happening here in Scotland, and they can understand why that is needed. Whereas if we are then saying to people, okay, can you help provide this in India, then people would be like, but that's something we take for granted here in Scotland. That's not an issue here in Scotland. So part of our work, I suppose, is to educate people, because only when they understand the need will they then want to help. And if they don't understand the need, then yeah, they just won't help. So part of, I suppose, is us showing people, demonstrating what the need is in India, and then showing them how they're able to meet that need and how they can help.
Excellent. Thanks, Jamie. Any other questions from the audience? So yeah, Ali, welcome.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Well, thanks so much for organizing the panel. Thanks to the students for putting this together. My question is to Charlotte. Let me just put my hand down. Right. So my question is to Charlotte. I am, just for context, I'm a teaching fellow at the Amore House. And we are working with students in many different ideas. Some of them are more theoretical. Some of them, of course, more practical, such as this panel. But my question for Charlotte is, you mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong, because at the end of the week, my brain's already mushed. You mentioned in your talk that you work under a framework of a critical understanding of development, and also post-colonial, decolonial understanding of your work. How do you negotiate that with the SDGs? And what part of your work is thinking about what to do with the features of your organization and the features of the SDG, which necessarily adopts or assigns itself to any framework? That's what I mean. And because that was very interesting, I've never heard until now of an organization with a clearly critical framework of work. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. It's quite a challenging question to think about. I would agree. I find that there's lots of tensions in our work. Like we would with learners, we have to take teachers from different starting points. So some starting points, you might have to start with a topic like fair trade, which is quite straightforward, before you really start to challenge teachers. And certainly in terms of the SDGs, yes, we would apply a critical framework to that. We would look at them. We do try to interrogate our own assumptions personally, and we would also have tried to apply some kind of critical thinking and interrogate some of the Sustainable Development Goals. I suppose overall it's really about trying to bring teachers on this on this journey where they are prepared to be open and critical and challenge their own assumptions and perceptions and thinking. One of the academics that we work, whose work informs what we do, is Vanessa Andreotti, and she has created a kind of a frame of soft global citizenship and critical global citizenship. So it's that kind of working from that kind of soft global citizenship, which we might call charity fundraising, to a more kind of critical perspective where you're kind of really challenging the kind of the structures and the things that exist that have kind of created the situation that we're kind of in at the moment. So I mean, it's quite hard to answer off the top of my head, but there's quite a lot of things I'm quite happy to have a conversation with you and share some of the papers and the thinking that we have behind it all.
I would really appreciate. I think Vanessa is a fellow Brazilian, isn't she?
Yes, yes.
I'm from Brazil as well, but
okay,
does not mean that I know anything about global citizenship. I work with policy basically, and I think that for our students, the main reason of my question, of course, to understand your work, but also to show the students that the frameworks that we adopt or that we study, that see in the classroom, they are also frameworks that shape the way that we work, whether you work in fundraising, whether you work implementing or developing the SDGs, or either the way you work training teachers to live in the world of the SDGs, right? With citizenship, for instance, or quality education. I think that what you shared just now, the example you gave us from your work and from your organization, is that there is a coherence of work that also comes from the way that you understand the world. If you think, well, we should be developing citizens, global citizens in the case, they should be able to understand, not only to understand that they should be able to question the frame of where they live. We should help teachers to not only see that themselves for themselves as, having a role in the educational system, but also when they go on and implement a curriculum, and help the students to instigate this thinking as well. Whatever is the thinking, in your case, is critical. So I think that this is a very good example as well for the students to see that the frameworks that we discuss in class, they do matter as well when we leave Morehouse later on.
Yeah.
So thank you.
And it's very much it's about bringing those different perspectives to what you're doing, and recognizing that even as a maths teacher, you're not teaching in a values-free space.
Yeah,
what you teach and how you teach it is informed by your values, which again is informed by your perception of the world, which is shaped by your culture, by your color, by your nationality, etc. So it's about really encouraging teachers to kind of dig deep and really get behind that and recognize they're not challenging yourself and your identity. You're asking you to challenge your perceptions that you see of the world and ensure that a variety of perspectives are demonstrated in the classroom, but also to ensure that you're providing all the young people that you're working with are getting those perspectives as well. I've just popped in the chat box. Bridge 47 was an amazing project that ran across Europe. It's finished last year, but it was a network of organisations working in the field of global citizenship education, and they've produced. If you look to the resource section, they've produced loads of really interesting papers on critical global citizenship. There's lots there, but again, if you contact me afterwards, I'll happily flag up some of the key papers that I think would be useful for you.
Thank you so much. So our students for the CEID course, they will be seeing some of these in the coming weeks, so they better be prepared. Thank you so much.
Excellent. We're going to try to address one final question, because I realized I just missed one in the chat from one of our students coming in from the library who couldn't join us vocally. And we'll go to Jamie and Gary with this question, asking just what does a typical workday look like for you? Which is probably really hard to describe, but I think typical workday look like. So Gary, what is a typical workday for you?
Well, I think the answer is there isn't one. Over the last 2 years, obviously, it's quite important to make sure that the internet works, because everything's on Zoom or Teams. I would probably, if I'm based at home, and as a grandmother, I have 3 daughters, and 2 of them have young babies, a baby and a 2-year-old. So I'm often in their homes as well as in my own. So I'm always aware that the computers and the iPad and the iPhone should be working. So I'm checking first thing in the morning, I'm checking to see what's, well, in the diary, finding out what I'm meant to be doing, and then making sure that at least one of these bits of equipment does work. I'm often on Zoom calls, and perhaps 2 or 3 or even 4 of those in a day. And because of our projects at UN House, they are led by interns. I wouldn't necessarily be speaking on the calls, which is fortunate if the internet's not very good, but I would be making sure that I'm there and I can hear what's happening. And on projects such as on Afghanistan or on Yemen, it's quite important. And in fact, the Model UN, it's quite important that there is in the background my presence, so that people if they have questions, they can always ask. So there's not a usual day, but I'm always online one way or another and ready to troubleshoot should there be anything. Thank you. Excellent, thanks. Jamie, what's your typical day like?
So the same as Gary. Sadly, there's or perhaps I shouldn't say sadly. One of the good things is that no 2 days are the same. I would typically start work either 8:30 or 9. So depending on whether I'm in Edinburgh, I would go through to the office there, or if I'm at home, I live in Falkirk, and then I would simply come to my dining room, which is where I am, and I would turn on the computer. One of the first things I would do is I would get my diary out, and I would look to sort of see what are the things that are scheduled for that day. And I would also do a to-do list, which is a habit I've always got into, in terms of particularly at home, whenever you don't have the other people to bounce ideas around, or you don't see other people, then sometimes at the end of a long day it can appear frustrating that you haven't achieved anything. So I like to always sort of set a to-do list in terms of what I would like to prioritise for that day. And it means by the end of that day, hopefully I'm able to tick some things off. And that gives me a very small sense of satisfaction that at least, even if there are some massive projects that are still dragging on, at least there are a few things that I've been able to achieve. And then it's just a case of looking to see what are the things I'm working on. So at the minute it's reviewing our budget, so to see in terms of our income, what have we spent, and what the income that we're getting in, and what is off track, and how we can address that. Also at the minute it's looking at our strategy, so it's looking to see what are our plans for the future in terms of what do we want to achieve. Also preparing, we have a board meeting next month, so getting ready for that. And then the last one would be recruitment. So at the minute we are recruiting for someone to join our team, and so it's just a case of responding to questions as people will contact and ask a bit more about the role. So say same as Gary, no 2 days are the same, but rather than seeing it as a negative, to me it's a positive. What they say, variety is the spice of life, and so it's good that there's that variety, both of things that I enjoy and perhaps things that are slightly less enjoyable, but there's a good variety in terms of what I do. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks, Jamie. Well, with that, I would like to kind of wrap things up here. I want to give a big thank you for our panelists for helping us better understand your work and what great work you're doing here in Edinburgh and broadly in education and development. So thanks, Jamie, Gary, and Charlotte for joining us today. I want to thank our event planning team, especially Rona, who was taking the lead on this event, and Evelyn and Rona for sharing questions today. This is the first of 2 panels. So the second panel will be starting at 1, so you've got a chance to have lunch and come on back and join us. We'll have 3 other organizations, including Classrooms for Malawi, Scotland's International Development Alliance, and Link Education International. So 3 other great organizations working in this area. Join us. I've just put the link there if you are familiar with it. Feel free to copy that over and join us in at 1 o'clock. I also wanted to give one other piece before we sign off. So Carol, who's actually just said thank you on the chat, is helping to lead one of our next events. This is our CEID Research Group event on the state of education in Afghanistan. That will be happening next Friday. So you can register on the Eventbrite link that we just posted there, and please feel free to share that with your friends. So finally, one of the hopes is that following up from this meeting, and I'll post it in this Teams chat, but I'll also email it out to people, is that I'll be sharing a little bit of a summary of this, but mainly talking about how students might be able to engage with these organizations. So you heard some of this internship and stuff. It'll be a little bit of a reminder of the opportunities you have to engage with organizations in each of these two panels. So do be looking for that email probably within the next week or two. And don't forget to follow up, network, think about what you're passionate about, and see how you can work with these organizations to make a difference. All right, so that's it for me. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining. Really appreciate it, spending part of your Friday here, and I hope if you're available, you're able to make our next panel. So thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Stop the recording.